This special edition, In the Line of Duty.
When the police grabbed hold of this individual, he started to punch, kick, and headbutt, and he bit both of the police officers.
The young mother said the officer stated he, quote, could already see my areola, and if someone saw my nipple, he would have to arrest me.
We got men down with an explosion on the corner of 234 and Tibbet Avenue.
I thought it was coming from downstairs.
Because the officers went and door knocked downstairs.
I talked to him after and he said no.
Remember these chattering teeth from your boyhood or girlhood? They were a lot of fun, and they really couldn't do any harm to anyone. It's the teeth in people's heads that can and has done major harm to cops. Hello, welcome to Watching Your Six from In the Line of Duty. I'm Ron Barber. Just do a Google search of police officer bitten during arrest, and you can see for yourself. 2 Philly officers bitten, suspect arrested.
The male tried to flee from police. When the police grabbed hold of this individual, he started to punch, kick, and headbutt, and he bit both of the police officers. Anytime someone's bit, a human bite, it is really potentially very dangerous, so it has to be thoroughly cleaned. And this particular 32-year-old suspect who was arrested is well known to the police in the area for not only selling drugs, but also doing drugs.
Memphis woman with HIV bites officer after arrest.
Police pulled her over for an expired tag. During the stop, they arrested her for not having insurance. Later, as police checked on her in the back of the police car, she tried to escape. Police tackled her to the ground. She began swinging her keys and bit one of the officers. The bite drew blood. Then, while getting treatment at the hospital for injuries suffered during the scuffle with officers, she admitted to having AIDS.
Staten Island cop bitten in face during gun arrest. Man arrested after allegedly biting off part of Virginia cop's ear. Or maybe the officer's ear just fell off during the natural course of events. On and on it goes, and have no doubt some bites and their aftermath have been ugly and horrific. This woman lost part of her hand after she'd been bitten by another woman who just wanted to figure out a way to get back into jail. No idea what happened here. YouTube just titles it, Worst Female Human Bite. As the doctor narrating this points out, there's frequently serious danger of various infections from severe bites, and they need immediate treatment.
Since human oral cavity contains a lot of bacteria, both anaerobes and aerobes, there are the high chances of getting infection, and it becomes quite difficult to treat, and they are also getting the infection of HIV as well as the hepatitis B.
Now, what is Barber's axiom for when cops are bitten? Well, it's pretty darn simple. If you're being bitten so hard you find yourself losing consciousness and or control, maybe it's time to gouge out an eye or reciprocally bite off your assailant's ear. Almost all academy training teaches pain compliance, but when you're the one experiencing the pain, always remember the object is for all parts and pieces of you to go home at the end of your shift. If your perception is you're about to lose a finger, an ear, your nose, control, or consciousness, remember, no law enforcement training ever taught that you need to leave a limb or potentially your life behind because you wanted to be politically correct or because your attacker was, quote, unarmed, unquote. If a lowlife has teeth and tries to use them to disable you, Barber's axiom states he or she is not unarmed. Still, I wanted to get some advice from the legal beagles as to just when does a cop have the right to use force, whatever force necessary, to stop a vicious biter. Our crack legal team said the answer is it depends on the severity of the bite. Did the attacker merely nibble on the officer's ankle? Or did the attacker cause potentially serious disfigurement or place the officer at a substantial risk of death? Also, they said the answer requires a state-by-state review of the applicable statutes addressing the use of deadly force in self-defense and in making arrests. For example, here in Missouri, quote, an officer may use deadly force against an attacker who has bitten the officer if the bite causes serious physical injury, places the officer at a substantial risk of death, or constitutes a forcible felony. But beware, that means basically if it's a bite to the arm, for example, that merely leaves a mark or draws a small amount of blood, it will likely not rise to the level of a forcible felony, and therefore an officer may not use lethal force in that situation. Now, very importantly, keep in mind the situation becomes more complex where the attacker is HIV positive and the officer is aware of that fact. Most states have criminal laws that address exposure and or transmission of HIV. Under Missouri law, for example, it is a felony for someone knowingly infected with HIV to bite someone, including a police officer. Therefore, a police officer may respond with deadly force to protect himself from being bitten by someone who the officer reasonably believes is infected with HIV, regardless of the severity of the bite, because the bite would be considered a forcible felony. Most states have minor variations on these themes, and seeing as how most street cops will ultimately get nibbled on at some point during his or her career, remember that forewarned is forearmed. It's always a good thing when all of you gets home safely at the end of your shift. Here are some questions. Have you ever been bitten during an encounter on shift? What happened? What was your response? When do you believe a bite may rise to the level of lethal force, whether it comes from a two-legged subject or a four-legged one? What is the applicable law in your state regarding reasonable response to stop an HIV-positive subject trying to or starting to bite you? Cameras, they're everywhere. They're on your body, in your computer, on your phone, and yes, even here in my little office closet just for this. And since it's an inarguable fact, cameras can pop up anywhere at any time. Remember, officer safety always comes first, but Those unexpected acts of kindness by cops can do amazing things for law enforcement public relations. In this YouTube video, a New Mexico officer sees a homeless man lying along the side of the road with bare feet and shredded shoes. The cop drives to the nearest shoe store, buys a brand new pair of shoes for the man, and gives him a $20 bill for something to eat. Here, a Colorado officer has taken a little girl into his arms, trying to distract her from the fact that a wreck has taken the life of her father. He is pointing to all the flashing lights of cruisers and first responders and singing, "Twinkle, twinkle, little star," to her. On the other side of the coin, even the most casual, mundane encounters with the public can end up making you look like Attila the Hun when you least expect it. Take this Georgia officer who suggested a young breastfeeding mom cover up a bit more as she stood in a checkout line at a Piggly Wiggly grocery store. She didn't take kindly to it, and neither did thousands of other ladies who were alerted to the incident when it went viral on the internet. Now, it's important to understand that women can breastfeed pretty much whenever and wherever they want in 49 of the 50 United States as of this production, and Georgia is one of the 49. The young mother said the officer stated he, quote, "could already see my areola, and if someone saw my nipple, he would have to arrest me." She added that, quoting again, "for him to see my areola, he would have had to be staring very hard." Enter the sheriff trying to tamp down the internet conflagration by issuing a statement that the young mom was entirely within her rights to breastfeed at the supermarket, adding that, "as a father and grandfather, my children were all breastfed, and I would never condone a law enforcement officer telling my wife that she should stop feeding our child or face arrest." We have sent out a reminder to all our deputies that in accordance with Georgia law, a woman has a legal right to breastfeed wherever she needs to without having to cover up. However, he added in the deputy's defense, he only approached the woman after some customers had complained about her breastfeeding in a checkout line. So, the sheriff said the officer asked her if she had anything she could use to cover up, that he never asked her anything else. All leading to some quick questions. Are you fully aware of the laws pertaining to breastfeeding in your state? What are any pertinent indecent exposure laws in your state? When, if ever, would breastfeeding in public cross the line into an indecent exposure incident? Do you continually practice what-if scenarios whenever possible? If not, why not? Could a powdered donut, a little bit larger than these, someday save your life? I'm here to tell you the answer is yes, and I can prove it. An FDNY captain is killed, and multiple police officers and firefighters are injured when a marijuana grow house in the Bronx explodes. Could it happen on your turf? Well, this was the very first such grow house ever to explode in New York City. And it all began with multiple 911 calls which brought firefighters out to the response of leaking natural gas. Once on scene, they found a dark room and the marijuana grow house and immediately summoned police. Within minutes of cops' arrival and shortly after evacuating everyone inside, there was a huge explosion that virtually lifted the roof off the building, hurling parts of it and other debris onto Captain Michael Fahey, who had been directing operations from the street. The 44-year-old 17-year veteran firefighter was killed. Multiple officers, firefighters, and Con Ed workers were injured.
Rush on the bus. We need multiple ambulances.
What's the emergency there, sir?
Explosion occurred. Box 3732, 234th Street and Irwin Avenue.
10-4.
Ambulances. Explosion occurred at the box.
10-4.
3-6 to the Bronx, urgent.
What's the urgent, guys?
He says, we got men down with an explosion on the corner of 234 and Tibbet Avenue. We got a man down, firefighter down, bad shape.
All right, 10-4.
Ironically, moments before the explosion, Captain Fahey had stopped a tenant in the apartment from starting a car, fearful there would be an explosion. Who knows how many lives Captain Fahey saved with that gesture? Also, first responders heard a hissing noise, suggesting indeed there had been a break in the gas line. An illegal natural gas hookup was observed, so in all likelihood, the tenant's gas bill would not look suspicious. Numerous artificial heat sources were found, as well as blue vats of liquid fertilizer, which is highly combustible. Windows were sealed, and insulation had been stuffed in every crack and crevice to better contain heat. Gas tanks of helium were also scattered around the house. It's used to rid mature marijuana plants of pesticides. Firefighters capped the natural gas line 45 minutes before the explosion. Police had received a tip about a month earlier related to possible illegal activity and were, quote, in the initial stages of investigation. The tenant of the apartment was arrested hours later in New Jersey, although he is not believed to be the so-called brains behind the operation. In Volume 5, Program 8 of In the Line of Duty, Sheriff Glenn Boyer of rural Jefferson County, Missouri, which has had a huge meth problem for years, pointed out that large cities generally don't have the same problems rural areas do with grow labs, but...
Well, you're not going to see much of it in the city because it would be so readily detected. Now, I'm not going to say it won't happen in the city because it already has. And in fact, we've assisted both St. Louis City, St. Louis County in the recent past on labs up in their venues. I think what you will find, though, in those major metropolitan areas is that population is such that when these labs are set up, you immediately begin to smell the fumes and you start getting complaints to the local law enforcement agencies, as opposed to being out in a rural area to where the homes are a little spread out, there's more places to hide them, that it seems to gravitate out to these areas rather than to the more congested inner community.
And Sheriff Boyer pointed out that
training is critical because of the various dangers involved. What it all comes down to is officer safety. All training must keep that in the forefront.
The safety of the officer has to be paramount. When you go into one of these situations, even though it's a working lab, you just can't automatically send some street officers in, kick the door in, and try and seize this lab, because what's going to happen is just the mere presence of the officer might cause the lab to explode. Handling of the chemicals might cause the lab to explode. Breathing of the fumes might cause lasting physical effects on the officer. So paramount above all else is just the simple safety of the officers responding to these types of situations.
And now a few questions. As the first arriving officer to a report of a likely natural gas leak, what is your protocol? Evacuation? Communication to fire, utility, additional assistance? How would you proceed with a hasty evacuation effort? Door to door, loudspeaker, text, social media, or a combination? Knowing as these first responders did that A, there was a natural gas leak, and B, It was likely coming from a grow house. What do you feel the safest distance should have been to ensure your safety, safety of other first responders, and civilians? Our program, Volume 12, Program 10, Hazardous Materials, What Every Cop Needs to Know, has invaluable tips and tactics for first responders dealing with a variety of hazardous materials dangers. Again, it's Volume 12, Program 10, and here's a preview. Whether it's ricin in a Las Vegas hotel room, anthrax in an envelope at the D.C. post office, a rolling meth lab in upstate New York, a huge chlorine explosion in downstate Missouri, cops are invariably the first on scene, and that's where you can really get into trouble if you don't know a few of the basic ground rules.
Officers have a tendency, as most first responders do, to go directly to the scene. Now, we've taught them on things like bank robbery, hold-up alarms at banks, to survey the scene first before going in. But sometimes when they're going to an auto accident, they're not thinking criminal, they're thinking rescue. And they don't take that few seconds to survey the scene, to see the placard on the side of the truck, to see someone who might be down in something.
Although it may not sound very high-tech, Lieutenant Gray has a surefire way for cops to get a quick read on a potential hazmat or chemical incident.
Whenever they pull up on a scene, that they should use the powdered donut theory. That being, you hold up the powdered donut, if you can see the entire scene within the hole, you're back far enough. Then pay attention to which way the powdered sugar is blowing so that you know which way the wind direction is. But it's a real quick rule of thumb of figuring out which way the wind's blowing and also how close or not close to be.
Like fingerprints, no two cases of exigent circumstances have ever been quite the same. For cops, that can mean skating on ice that is thinner than a politician's conscience. Did exigent circumstances play a role in an incident which ended up getting 2 veteran Los Angeles officers fired? Here's the scenario as it occurred.
911, what is the address to your emergency?
A 911 caller reports she returned to her apartment around midnight and saw a man with a ball cap and tank top running from the building. Moments later, she heard a woman's screams. She tells the call taker she believes the screams came from the apartment directly below hers. But when 4 LA officers respond, they do everything except knock on the door of the apartment in question. They interview the young caller. They shine a flashlight into the downstairs apartment and see an empty bed and see nothing in the living room. They wander around the exterior of the building and rattle a few doors to see if they're locked. Even when the young woman who'd called 911 asks if they'd knocked on the door where she thought the screams had emanated, she's told no.
I thought it was coming from downstairs.
Was the officers weighing the door knock downstairs?
I talked to him after and he said no.
Conclusion, no sign of a crime. Cops leave, and 30 minutes later, the same caller hears a loud bang, looks out, sees the same man she had seen earlier jump from a balcony and again flee.
I just called the cops about a girl screaming.
Moments later, the downstairs apartment erupts in flames.
Oh my God,
okay.
the whole apartment is on fire.
Upon arrival, LA firefighters make a grisly discovery. The body of a 21-year-old co-ed burned beyond recognition in that bed that had been eyeballed by the officer with a flashlight a half hour earlier. She had also been brutally stabbed 19 times. After a Board of Rights hearing, the 2 veteran cops are fired. The 2 rookies with them that night are allowed to keep their jobs. The hearings leading to the dismissals were held behind closed doors, so we'll probably never know the exact basis of the decisions to terminate the officer's employment. Were the firings solely because of allegedly poor investigatory tactics? Could the firings have been the result of an accumulation of issues? Should they at minimum have knocked on that door? Of course, just knocking on a door and getting no response wouldn't necessarily mean bupkis. Should they have called a supervisor? Since there was only one caller to 911, were there exigent circumstances, in your opinion, to get into that apartment?
We'll never know if, when they responded to the initial 911 call, if Andrea was alive or not. But we do know that the fire hadn't been set then.
From criminallawfreeadvice.com. If police break into a locked building because they heard screams, an example of exigent circumstances, anything the police saw could be used in a trial against the person committing the crime inside. From legaldictionary.net. If, for instance, police knocked on someone's door and heard someone screaming for help inside, they would certainly be justified in entering the home, as the screaming person may be in danger. From lawenforcementtoday.com. Due diligence needs to be pursued in order to determine if officers have an exigency, regardless of the circumstances. It boils down to what is known, when was it known, and were reasonable steps taken to investigate and ensure safety. If a caller or witness heard screams and pinpointed the location of those screams to police, is that exigent circumstances, just like it would be if a cop had heard them? What if there had been 2, not 1, separate callers to 911? Would that have been exigent circumstances to get into the apartment? Would you have just peered in the windows as the one officer did, shine a flashlight around, see an empty bed, and come to the conclusion there's nothing amiss? Would you have moved on to the next call and simply forgot about it? What would you have done?
If they had gone into the apartment, maybe Andrea would be alive today.
Upon investigation, a significant amount of blood was found underneath the young woman's bed, leading detectives to believe she may have been under that bed at the time the officer looked in with his flashlight. 2 of the young woman's roommates had apparently slept through the screams and were only awakened when the fire started. 2 young men were subsequently arrested. It's believed they had burgled a nearby apartment and possibly had seen the young woman and had broken in with intentions to sexually assault and or rape her. It is thought that possibly she fought one or both off, leading to her murder. As of this production, they await trials for murder. The young woman had been a psychology major, an honor student in high school, a sorority sister, and had volunteered to help make bricks for houses for the poor in Peru. However, just days before she was murdered, she was due in court to answer for charges. She possessed meth, mushrooms, ecstasy, and LSD with an intent to distribute. Now, if you're a subscriber to Line of Duty Learning, our online video library, we strongly suggest you check out Volume 4, Program 7, crime scene preservation. Here's a preview.
Proper crime scene investigation is actually a reconstruction. In this day and age, you hear a lot about reconstruction of automobile accidents. Well, the reconstruction of crime scene, of the scene of the crime, has been around for a long time. Now, we have a lot of new technology that enhances it, but the basics are still the basics. And the fact is that the person responsible for that, and in most occasions that is one or more crime scene investigators, people who, like myself, specialize in that area, need to deal with the evidence that was there, undisturbed.
Evidence can be compromised by accident and through thoughtless actions.
Moving and disturbing objects within the crime scene, using the telephone, using the bathroom, getting a drink of water, using a glass, taking a soda out of the refrigerator. I know these might sound far-fetched, but I've seen them all happen. In more than 20 years in crime scene investigation, I have seen police officers make coffee at crime scenes and eat food at crime scenes that come out of the kitchen, open up and drink soda at crime scenes. And because they figure, well, the homeowner is dead, so they don't need that. But these are tragic mistakes because it alters the crime scene. It alters the facts that are present and changes the physical evidence that's found by the investigators when they arrive.
The first obligation of first responders is to render assistance to victims. But of primary importance, control access to the scene to protect that very fragile evidence.
The first thing is to control access. Now, naturally, there's responsibilities of render aid to see if there's anyone injured and to make sure that you render aid to them. And if the emergency medical services are needed, call them, and to locate suspects and witnesses. But also, they have to be thinking physical evidence and to control the access. You know, the old adage of too many cooks spoil the soup. And what I try to teach young police officers in the academy setting is, if you need additional help, call all the help you need, but don't call any more than you need. If you need one person to watch the front door, call one person, but don't call 10, because if you call 10, the other 9 are going to end up inside the crime scene. The more people you have walking through a crime scene, touching, stepping on things, either adding to or taking away from the scene. They may be carrying items into the scene that shouldn't be there, or carrying items out, or destroying items that could be in there. And it is probably the number one error.
Now remember, you can take a test drive with Line of Duty's online training for 2 weeks for free. It gives you a no-obligation opportunity to check out any of the more than 300 video courses and classes we offer online via our learning management system 24/7. Get your login allowing you free access for 14 days simply by emailing your request to info@lineofduty.com or calling 800-462-5232. That's Watching Your 6. I'm Ron Barber. Thanks for watching. And remember, next time we may be watching you in the line of duty.